everyone, welcome back to another video. Last time we left off with the preface in this new series, just talking about kind of more what the book talks about and the general uh, strokes of what it talks about. But we're now on to part 1, the colonial period. And look at this painting. Whew. Very pretty. I'll try to do this while I read. The era of exploration and settlement is part of the history of the Old World as well as the New. Only 5 of the European nations took very active part in the race for colonies: Spain, Portugal, Holland, France, and England. England was a laggard in the race, establishing no permanent settlements until Jamestown in 1607. But she soon outdistanced all the others, um, partly by the possession of superior sea power, and partly by her island position, which safeguarded the homeland from foreign invasion, and partly by a wise neglect which permitted colonists to worship as they pleased and, within certain limits, to organize their own institutions. Spain, Portugal, and France were tempted to overgovern and manage their colonies in bureaucratic fashion, while the Dutch regarded theirs almost exclusively as trading ventures. This enabled the 13 colonies on the American mainland to become fairly populous. It was a qualitative selection too. Americans had to have some very special urge to leave a civilized environment and face what was then a savage, rough, and forbidden wilderness. Some who came were religious refugees, such as the Puritans of New England or the Quakers and Mennonites of Pennsylvania. Most of them sought land and a better living in a new country. A few, it must be confessed, were human driftwood, never able to stay in any place, and criminals who had escaped to a distant shelter. But all, for one reason or another, did not fit into the ordered, conventional communities at home. The qualities which have always been recognized as specifically American are those of pioneers and frontiersmen. There was, on the good side, initiative, versatility, or, oh my gosh, I can't say the word, I don't know why, but it's versatility, and mutual helpfulness. On the bad side, waste and lawlessness. And neither good nor bad in themselves, love of change, novelty, and movement. With the defeat of the French, the only serious rivals of the 18th century English, the colonies no longer had need of British protection. Unfortunately, just at the moment when the bonds of discipline should have been loosened, George III and his ministers chose to tighten them. The colonists were in the position of a teenager who is asked by worried parents to surrender his car key and cease driving the family auto. This is doubly resented, first, because such restraints are unfamiliar, and second, because the growing boy feels that as he approaches maturity, he should have more liberty than less. The colonist had many specific grievances against the mother country, but more important than any of these was the fact that a new national sentiment was growing. Americans no longer thought of themselves as exiled Britons or exclusively as Pennsylvanians or Virginians, but as Continentals, Americans. Now, what they're talking about is partly true. There is a growing sentiment as a unified nation, but there was still very much this feeling of um, I'm my state. You know, a lot of people felt that way, and it would kind of boil over eventually in the Civil War. You know, in the Civil War, you get to that point where many people feel that way. Um, but it is also true that many felt that way. And I think actually their analogy of kind of how the colonists felt and why they kind of rebelled against um, England is also quite true in some ways. The colonists had been given a lot of freedom, like they said, a lot more than a lot of the other powers gave their colonies. And so when George III kind of was like, "Hey, we just defended you from the French in the 7 Years' War," or and for many Americans, it'd be the French and Indian War. Um, we need some taxes. We need some money back for that. So they tightened their grip. Well, Americans who had not necessarily felt this kind of as unjust because they didn't have a say in Parliament. Um, and it would very much boil over, obviously, into a full-scale rebellion. Um, just interesting. Uh, I obviously I know the book is going to be a little bit more favorable towards America in some of this, but I'll do my best to try to kind of steer it towards what is more actual of what happened. But you know, it is nice to still hear these stories, of course. The Indians continent. What did the European explorers find in the area? Which, here, I'll try to zoom out as best as I can here. What did the European colonists or explorers find in the area which is now the United States of America? First of all, the great boon of the temperate climate. A tropical climate is in many ways a heavy handicap. Civilizations first emerged in the warm countries, where nature gives a margin of leisure and fruitfulness over and above bare existence. But people of the more stimulating temperature regions soon took up the work and extended it. We can trace this northward movement from Egypt and Mesopotamia to Greece and Rome, and then to northern Europe and North America. But, except for the mild Pacific coast, the United States has a more accented um, one thing, or one might even say drastic climate than most parts of Europe. The contrast of seasons is great. Hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, and thunderstorms are common. The average temperature and rainfall is not far from that of Europe, but it is so seldom average. There are no Alps to act as a barrier either to the polar winds from the north or the heat waves from the Gulf of Mexico. How farmers have suffered from sunstroke in North America, or North Dakota, and northerners have swooped down on Texas and even Florida, killing the crops. Um, and northerners, yeah. In general, the southern states have hot summers and mild winters. The northern states' summers almost equally hot, but balanced by cold and snowy winters. Um, the area of the country is about 1/16 of the land area of the globe. It may be doubted whether any other area of equal extent has such a rich variety of minerals and vegetable resources. Although some useful commodities are lacking and must be imported, such as tin and rubber, there is much wealth in coal and oil, iron and copper, silver and gold. Nearly all temperate zone plants can grow, as well as some subtropical ones, such as cotton. Most of this wealth was untapped. The Native Americans did not know how to exploit the country's hidden wealth. Sometimes they froze above coal deposits and died of famine in places where great cities now stand. The Indians themselves were probably immigrants from northeastern Asia, perhaps by the way of Siberia and Alaska. They differed in stature, head shape, and nose form, but all had the straight, coarse black hair of the Mongolian, which is rather scant on face and body. Um, they may have entered America some 20,000 years ago, long enough to become adapted to their new environment. In some tropical regions, certain tribes attained civilization, such where the Maya of Central America, the Aztec of Mexico, and the Inca of Peru. But within the present limits of the United States, they were essentially barbarians, living in tribes ruled by custom rather than law, in time of peace, and led by chiefs in time of war. Um, oh boy. Their knowledge of metals was very rudimentary, and they had few domestic animals except the dog. The Spaniards introduced them to the horse, and in a few generations, most of them became skillful and daring riders. Some cultivated crops, and we owe to them our potato, tomato, maize (Indian corn), and the cacao bean, from which we get cocoa or coca and chocolate. Most tribes were warlike, their courage was legend, and their skill in an ambush or an unexpected attack gave much trouble to the early settlers. Their sense of beauty was reflected in their arts of weaving and pottery, their fondness for the oratory, and their musical place names which lie scattered across the continents. Constant habits of war often made them skillful warriors. In general, the first contact between the white man and the Native American is a sad story, but not all the fault lay with either. Some of it was a misunderstanding, because the two cultures were so different. Thus, the European often thought he had bought a piece of land outright, whereas the Indian thought that he was merely selling hunting rights over the territory in question. I'll try to read some of this really quick. Several views of the activities of the Tidewater Indians of the Algonquin tribes in northern Carolina during the 16th century. Um, so that's the Algonquin tribe. Some of the activities they did. Oh no, that's Indians fishing. My bad. That's Indians fishing. In the center, Indians dance. And at the bottom, a walled Indian village. And then here is a Timucua chief apparently dispensing justice with English militiamen looking on. These engravings first appeared in a book by Theodore de Bry, America, published in Frankfurt in 1590. De Bry had used some watercolors painted by John White as his models. White was a cartographer and artist who was commissioned to go with the expedition sponsored by Sir Walter Raleigh in 1585. He was then appointed as the governor of the second Roanoke colony in 1587. That year, he went back to England and escaped the fate of the remaining colonists. At the right, Indians dressed in deerskins stalking food at a watering place. You can see them right there. But yeah, Sir Walter Raleigh and Roanoke, definitely an interesting story. If you can, look it up. There's a great video by a channel named Lemino. Definitely look it up. But yeah, and obviously how they're talking about Native Americans here, it's a little outdated now, you could say. Calling them barbarians, for instance, yeah, definitely a no-no. But this book's a little older, so of course it will. But yeah, the Native Americans, um, they might have come from Asia. That's a big theory out there. It's the leading theory, and it makes a lot of sense. They have a lot of characteristics in common with East Asians, um, like I said, Mongolians, and the people of Siberia a lot. So it makes a lot of sense if they are from that way, and we have some evidence of that. And that 20,000 years ago, that number is even being pushed back um, all the time. But yeah, it really shows how long ago the natives probably had been here. And they did have great empires, like they mentioned. There was the Inca, there was the Maya, there was the um, Aztec, and there was many others. There was the mound builders in Ohio, which yeah. But there's all sorts of different things, and the natives were very, very interesting people. Um, I don't think they'll probably get into too much more native history in this as much, but if you definitely can look up some Native American history, it's very, very interesting. But that's going to do it for this video. If you guys liked the video, leave a like. If you have any ways you can improve these videos, leave a comment down below. I always appreciate your feedback. And as always, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you.